So I'm Joy. I work here at Bates Nursery. This is Bates Botanical Boot Camp. I will be your drill sergeant today. And I'm here to talk to you about natives. This is something that I am personally passionate about. And since the beginning of my career in horticulture, it's always been something that I've been extremely interested in. I got my start in this industry in 2010 as a weed eater, working for a lovely lady in the west side of town. What I found out during that time is, one, though I love to weed eat, I don't love to weed eat all day because it's really hot in the summer times. But I also learned that I was really interested in the plants inside the beds that I was weed eating around. So from there, after 2 seasons, I signed up to get my certification of horticulture in Asheville State and completed that in 2012. And since then, I like to say my nail beds have been dirty ever since. So let's get into natives. Natives are plants that naturally grow in our area, in our region. They are already used to the humidity of our summers, the wet winters, our unique soil composition, and they're already established in our area already, so that gives them one step ahead of the game. Another main reason is that they support our local ecosystem and insect life, and that's a huge, really important thing. This guy wrote a book about it. I got to see him once, and he was fantastic. I will not regurgitate all of that information that he offers, but I really recommend that book. The majority of our insect life is considered specialists, which means they prefer certain species of plants. We call those plants host plants. There's also a really long list of host plants that I won't tell you every single one, but I do want to I'm going to work on putting on our website a list of native plants that we are able to source, as well as host plants and pollinators, which we'll get into next week. Spicebush is one of my favorite host plants. It's the host for the Spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. And if you haven't seen this caterpillar, it is the cutest caterpillar you will ever see. It's got faux eyes it's kind of to deter predators, but it's really cute. The pawpaw is the host for the zebra swallowtail. Pawpaws grow in the shade. Here in Tennessee region, usually you see them understory in kind of more moist, damp situations. There's also hot topic hackberry, which now is kind of seen as looked down upon a lot, but actually the hackberry supplies the most natural habitat for a large amount of insect life here in Middle Tennessee. So what stinks about that is we also have something called the woolly aphid, which was introduced to the United States in the 90s, which it is attacking our hackberries right now. And the unfortunate thing is when people treat their hackberries for the woolly aphids, they're not just treating the woolly aphids, they're also affecting a lot of the other insect life that we have here. So that's something very important to note. Other host plants are hickory, birch, oaks, switchgrass. Some of our native sedges are host plants for moths and butterflies in our region. Most importantly is the Asclepias family, or milkweed. That's the host for the monarch caterpillar. And there's several different plants within that species, or that genus. Another reason why natives are important is they also produce nuts, seed heads, and berries that our lovely birds and pesky squirrels depend on. When you are designing and wanting to include more native plant material into your landscape, the word that I would want to stress the most is diversity. You don't want too much of one thing. You want habitat for a lot of different species and insect life. And at the risk of getting too terribly philosophical, diversity matters in all aspects of our life. We as individuals have our own set of skills, motivations, and interests, which have guided us to what we do for a living and how we live our lives. It's our diversity as humans that keeps the whole going. Same goes for the plant life. Diverse gardens support a large amount of insect and bug life and help to keep our ecosystem functioning as it should. We definitely, as human beings, have done a number on natural habitat for all, whether it's insect life, deer, birds. So it's important that we do our best and try our hardest to offer some of that back to them. So getting into the details of native plants, we've got your larger shade-creating trees, which some of my favorites, American sycamore, sassafras, which unfortunately is really hard to find, not a lot of people grow it, hickories, which is also more rare, but we have carried it in the past, big leaf magnolia, which is what you see over here, which is super rare. You don't see it a whole lot. It's kind of more of an understory tree, but it still will get quite large, 20, 30 feet. So maybe like a good part sun situation where it's only getting morning sun and then some afternoon reprieve would be ideal. It will also grow in full shade if that's what you have as well, to offer that unique big leaf. Some of my favorite more ornamental trees that are native to this region would be the American fringe tree. That blooms in the spring. I have a tendency to drive around town and find material growing in certain areas. And there's this one fringe tree that's in East Nashville that I always go visit when it's in bloom because it's gorgeous. Another one is just redbud. There's so many different types of redbud. They're a cultivar of our native species. They're great mid-range trees. They come in purple. There's a new one called Flamethrower that we saw for the first time this year that's really neat. It emerges with red leaves, and it's really vibrant. What else? Who did I bring in here? We'll move on to shrubs. This is the American beetyberry, if you can see that. Calicarpa. It's also a partial sun shrub, and you don't really notice it in the summertime. Although they say that the leaves, they have a little stench to them. Not unpleasant, but it can also be a plant used to deter mosquitoes, which is what we're all looking for right now. And when it starts getting cold, the leaves drop, but the berries stay. And the birds really love to eat the berries, so it has many uses. We've also got, I brought the spice bush in so you can see it. It's nothing like spectacular, but I promise you, if you plant one of these, you're going to go out and try to find the little caterpillars because they're cute. Fruiting trees would be serviceberry, which is a really neat native fruiting tree. It's a mid-range tree, great fall color. One of our coworkers every spring makes a serviceberry loaf. That's delicious. We always look forward to that. And an interesting note about the name serviceberry is back in the day when the serviceberry started to bloom, they knew that the ground was soft enough to dig to bury the dead. So, interesting side note. American persimmon.
We have a question. What was the name of the tree with the berries and deters mosquitoes?
Calicarpa, or American beetyberry.
And also, is fringe tree vulnerable to the emerald ash borer?
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of, but don't quote me on it. So far I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay.
I hope not. Yeah, because in my yard I have hackberries and elms. So I'm crossing my fingers. Thank you for that question. I'm always willing to talk about beetyberry. American persimmon is another really cool native tree. I've got one in my yard. They're messy, but that's the point. They produce so much fruit for the squirrels and birds, and I'm happy to have it. Also, the red mulberry, messy, but the birds really love the berries, and that's what I have a pressure washer for. Who else? All right, more on shrubs. A couple key ones to note. There's Hypericum, St. John's wort, also on the front of this book. This is what I usually take with me on my hikes because I always like to know the name of things. Also, that's the same picture right here that I got tattooed on my arm because I love plants. Another good one is Fathergia. A cultivar Blue Shadow is really neat. It's got kind of this frosty blue leaf to it. Does great. I wouldn't put it in too much shade. I did, and it just doesn't hold that vibrant color. It's going to need some sun. Sweet shrub, or also called Calycanthus, is another really great native. It gets quite large, so prepare yourself for that, and it creates a nice screening if you're needing to screen something out. Perennials, we've got our native. This is a selection. It's called Rocky Top, but our native coneflower. And it was a naturally found selection, so it hasn't been messed with. But it's the only one that we're really able to get, and even finding this is hard. Not a lot of people grow it, and when they do, they sell them quickly. Also, just your more common Echinacea purpurea and all the cultivars that come from that, those are native as well, and are great for our butterflies and bees. And also the seed heads are great for birds. We've got bee balm. This is a little lovely native, if you can see that. Hummingbirds love that one. And aster. This is aromatic aster, Radon's favorite. One of my favorites. Blooms late into the season in fall, so it offers something beautiful to look at when everything else seems to be petering out. This that I'm trying to bring back because it's great. It gets a bad rap. Solidago, goldenrod. I've noticed this attracts different types of pollinators. They're usually sweat bees and little moths, but those are important too. And this I don't even have to move. This is Vernonia, which is also called ironweed. That's great for pollinators as well. Moving on to grasses. This is a native cultivar of little blue stem. Great color. And as the season progresses, it's blue, but then varying cultivars will either get more purple or more red, and they definitely need full sun. So note that. Forgot about my little shade friends. This is called Turtlehead. It's also a native, found in more wet, marshy conditions. So if you're going to plant it in your yard, know that you're going to need to pull a hose to it if we go through times of drought. And on the table here, we've got Autumn Bride. This is a native cultivar of Heuchera villosa, which there are a lot of coral bells that are Heuchera villosa parentage. And that's important because that type of coral bell can handle our humidity. There's other coral bells that are native to the northwest, and they just don't make it here. It's too hot. Or they rot in the winter. So if you're going to go the coral bell route, make sure that it's a villosa cultivar. Lastly, we've got a little Christmas fern here. This is what I typically see in the woods and spot the most when I'm hiking. It's great, semi-evergreen, mostly evergreen, just doesn't look as ideal as it would in the spring with its new growth. So that brushes on some of the native plants that we sell here. There's lots more, but I couldn't fit them in this room. So you'll just have to come out and see us. Another thing I want to stress is if you're interested in natives, one of the things that I did from the get-go was I started to go hiking around Middle Tennessee and discover plants. I would take my little guidebooks, take pictures, go home and research what they were. A few places that I would recommend doing this. Beeman Park is great, especially in the spring. There's a lot of spring perennials that bloom there. You've got the crested iris will bloom, shooting star. They've got wild ginger, trout lily. There's some service berries and native azaleas up there if you can catch them in bloom. Long Hunter State Park. There's not a whole lot to see there, but they just have a forest of hickory, shagbark hickory, and some of the largest that I've ever seen grow there. So that's really a fun place to go see those. Couchville Cedar Glade State Natural Area. It used to be called something else, I can't remember. But a few years ago they did a controlled burn So that kind of encouraged a lot of new native species to take hold. So out there is the largest stand of our Tennessee coneflower that I've ever seen. There's also Asclepias everywhere, milkweed, and lots of neat little native things you don't normally see because it's in the cedar glades. Volunteer Trail, another one, goes along, Percy Priest. The biggest sassafras I've ever seen. Spigelia, you'll see growing there, hearts a busting. So if you're out to discover, you'll discover a lot of things at that trail. And then also noted Shelby Bottoms. That's a really neat area if you can kind of take some of the other paths. There's one by the pond that's really cool. Trillium and bloodroot and mayapple, they'll all start popping up as the spring gets warmer. All right, so lastly, before we start taking questions, I just want to stress that we bring in as many natives as we possibly can, and that depends on what our vendors have to offer and what they grow. So as buying and planting native plants becomes more popular, as the demand becomes more strong, so will the supply be. So I just really want to encourage you to keep asking us, and we'll keep communicating with our growers and emphasizing natives and new natives, and maybe even attempt to grow a few on our own when things are slow. We're really limited on what we can grow here, but just know that you make a difference too, in voicing your opinions about what you'd like to see us have and how better the selection could be. And also, if you think to yourself, will it make a difference if I plant natives in my yard? When you feel like maybe your neighbors are not following that trend or whatever, no, it doesn't matter. It matters that you do. Because what you develop when you get into caring about native plants and butterflies and birds is this deepened respect for the earth around us. You can't help but get excited when you see that goldfinch who figured out where your coneflower is because it wants your seeds. Or even I love to hear the earthworms at night because I leave my leaves. I don't pick them up. I blow them into beds and they just decompose in the beds and the worms love it. So yes, it matters. And I think that it helps us be better. So that's about all I have. If you have any more questions that you don't ask on this webinar, feel free to come in. We'll be happy to show you the natives that we've got or answer any of your questions. Thank you.
So we have gotten a few questions. Let's see. Are any of the plants poisonous to dogs?
Oh, I always reference the ASPCA website. That's hard to retain, that information. Nothing's jumping out to me that would be. Maybe the turtle head. But yeah, I'd have to look up on the ASPCA. And it's a great list. It's got everything you need.
And where do you purchase native plants and trees?
Here. Come find me. I'll show you where all of them are. And we don't have a specific spot location on our property for natives, because really that would be half the lot if you really knew how many things are native.
Do we carry red mulberry here at Bates?
On occasion. We get it from one particular vendor usually, and he's had a rough go this summer, but last I heard he's back up and running, and so hopefully we'll get some material in from him. He also grows pawpaws, which we'll get those from other vendors too, but he really focuses on a lot of maybe like hardwood, natives, more woody material.
Is there any native type of columbine it won't survive the heat here?
There is, yeah. No, it's canadensis is the species name. It's the red one. And there's also little lanterns is a cultivar of that native species. So yeah, and you can if you hunt in the in our local forest, you'll find it.
I'll just send the names of the books in the chat.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on Jimson weed? I got some seed pods and I hear they get huge.
Jimson?
Jimson, I guess.
Not familiar with that. I don't know. I will respond in an email. If you'll email us.
Can you recommend shade-loving, deer-resistant shrubs and flowers?
Deer resistant? Is that what you said? Well, beetyberry is deer resistant. Typically ferns are. Coral bells are. For the most part. They'd still like that tender new growth. Anything with a scented stinky leaf tends to be something that deer leave alone. Yeah, so Monarda would fit into that category. Asters, they're not interested in asters. It's a gross leaf for them. But I mean, a lot of natives are deer resistant to a certain degree. But what I like to say here is deer don't necessarily read our tags. If they're hungry, they're going to eat something that maybe is said to be deer resistant. But the stinkier the leaf, the better.
And what was the name of the native coral bell?
It's Hucra villosa. That's the species, and then there's lots of cultivars of the villosa species. Autumn Bride is this one. And this one gets big. Like, this is the biggest. I've got one in my yard, and I underestimated how big it was going to get.
All right.
No.
Looks like you covered it.
All right. Thank you so much for joining with us.
Sorry.
One more.
Are local plants more disease resistant?
Yes and no. The problem is that we've brought a lot of diseases in along the over time. So, but yes, typically they are. But then again, we just talked about host plants. Sometimes the things that are eating the leaves of those plants are supposed to be there. That's the purpose. So keep that in mind too.
I'm not seeing any more questions. I think you're good.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I look forward to talking about pollinators next week. And I hope you guys have a good day.